welcome to all our guests and friends on the new episode of the talk show at AWA Agora. I'm your host, Abhay Wadhwa, and I'm delighted to see many regular faces and also very thankful to all of our followers and friends who have sent in such encouraging messages on what we have been doing with the AWA Agora Talk Show. I'm thrilled to also share with you that we have reached 1,220 subscribers on YouTube, which in some ways a new age metric on how we're doing, you know, with the content. Of course, we enjoy our the conversations with our friends very much. We are also very thankful that uh, many of our guests have written to us about wanting to come back on the show. So it's gratifying, and the teams have been working hard to kind of keep the process ongoing. As several of you already know, the history to this talk show is that we were in June, July last year, we were all sitting at home losing our mind, not being able to hang out with anyone or have any kind of conversation. So we came up with this thought that why don't we just have a place to get together the way we used to do when we could do it physically. And we started doing this on Zoom, and then started a thing called the Zestival, which is a Zoom festival, and kind of make the best of what we had, and also gave us an opportunity to further the dialogue, which as several of you, well, all of us in this room who have gone through this last year and a half of craziness would vouch for that. What we're missing is the social contact and the dialogues and the conversation. So we are thankful that all of you continue to support us, and we are really happy to see many regular faces. Please join me in welcoming Guy Geier. He's the managing partner at FX Collaborative here in New York City. Recently relocated to beautiful Brooklyn, and which I called home for 7 or 8 years before I moved to Queens. And Guy is going to be discussing a very interesting topic of design thinking. In the hurry that we all get into, the tizzy that we get into with just kind of meeting deadlines and getting projects built, et cetera, that how do you keep design thinking intact and use that as an innovative point of departure? you know and I'm really excited to hear from him on how he has been going about keeping that concept, that paradigm alive, and how it's impacting our zeitgeist. So on that note, Guy, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to be on our show, and
Thank you,
we're
Bobby. Yeah.
thrilled that we're having this conversation.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Super, super. So I see your backdrop there is beautiful downtown Brooklyn, huh?
Yeah, yeah, that's the view out the window right behind my desk. So yeah.
Fantastic. And that's a building that your company has designed, eh? Where you are now?
Yes, One Willoughby Square. We started working on about 2 or 3 years ago with developer JEMB. That as we started to talk about the kinds of tenants that they would be interested in attracting to the building, it's began to sound more and more like us. And before we knew it, we were signing a lease. So we now have 3 floors in the building.
Oh, fantastic.
And
fantastic.
Really excited to be there. It's a fabulous space.
Fantastic. How has, I do want to know a little bit more about your journey so far, but since we're on this topic, the changes that have occurred worldwide um, with the profession and companies, how have you coped? What did you do to cope with, first of all, just the workflow, and second, the stress of kind of keeping everybody, what's the word, sane?
You mean over the last year and a half as with COVID and all that?
Yeah.
Well, we've been really fortunate in that, number one, we our workload maintained itself pretty well. I mean, we had projects in the pipeline. We had lots of proposals come our way, and new work come in during the last year and a half. Which, when this all started a year ago, March, I was very worried, everybody was, about what it would mean to not just winning work, to getting new work, but also how we were going to do it. And fortunately, with us planning to move to Brooklyn anyway, we were looking at a model moving forward that would allow for remote work, because we just felt that giving people more flexibility was going to be an important component of how we did our work in the future. And so we were fortunate in that prior to needing to close the office in March of last year, we had already put in place all the technology to support remote work with virtual machines and other technology. And we actually had run a test, as the COVID cases started to tick up through February and March of last year. We started thinking, well, this could get to a point where we are going to have to close the office. So rather than wait for the last minute, let's have everybody stay home on a certain day and see if everything works. So we had everyone stay home and log into their systems from their homes or wherever they happen to be. And the system worked perfectly. We had very few little glitches, mostly from people finding out that they may not have enough bandwidth in their home or whatever, but that was easily resolvable. And so a week later, when we decided we really did need to close the office, we had pretty good confidence that we could keep going. And we were fortunate in the clients that we had were also in the same boat, and they were all very comfortable with working remotely and having Zoom meetings and other kinds of exchange of information. So we really didn't skip a beat. We kept the workload going, and we were off a little bit last year. We were probably about 10 or 15% off of our revenue targets, but a lot of that was because we had forecasted growth last year, and right. So we didn't grow. We just sort of maintained the same level, and so we were fortunate. And then coming into this year, it's been pretty much the same situation, although right now we are seeing quite a bit of activity in proposals and RFPs that is giving us some good confidence that things are going to continue to grow and improve through the rest of this year. So it's been quite amazing.
It's fantastic. Yeah, we're hearing that from our other friends also.
Yeah.
Things are picking up, and we haven't seen as much optimism, here, at least in New York, till now, because so far we were just like, we don't know.
Yeah. And I think, New York summers are always a little bit slow in New York anyway.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing from everybody is, in looking down the road at new work, is that really after Labor Day, that's kind of when people are expecting to shift into another gear and start moving forward on things. But, I think one of the critical factors in this whole thing has been that the technology has been in place for us to do this. I mean, if this pandemic had hit us 10 years ago, I think we and many other businesses in our field would have had to close their doors, because there would have been no way to do this. And the technology, not just Zoom, but the ability to share, very large files and information back and forth between us and our consultants and the contractors and our clients and everything else. And do that electronically uh, has been the game changer for us here. And
Right.
what's interesting is that I think going forward into the future, much of what we've learned and what we've applied during this kind of time of crisis will become standard operating procedure. And I was just in the office yesterday, and I said to somebody, I hope we don't start printing things again. Just because we're here and we have printers. We've been able
Right.
to work without paper printouts of most things for a year and a half. So why should we start using paper again? So
Yeah.
um, that's my next kind of objective, is to make sure that we learn from what we've done the past year and keep applying those lessons
Yeah.
going forward.
In fact, it's interesting you say that because in August next month, we are hosting a little workshop on so what did we learn? That's the title of it.
Right.
Um, so that we can uh, take those lessons into the future and adapt them if they are feasible and efficient, and if not, get back to what we used to be calling normal before the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Guy, I'm very curious for myself and for our guests, how your journey has unfolded over the last, I would say, 30, 40 years that you've been in the profession. Yeah.
That's about right. Yeah.
I'm always
40,
hesitant
about
to
40
say that,
years or so.
because you look
Yeah.
great, and but you clearly have a lot of experience. So, um,
Yeah. Well, I didn't get these gray hairs for no reason, but anyway. Um, so my journey, so my father was an interior designer and in the retail furniture world for many years. So he and residential furniture. So he really imparted on me a strong kind of design ethos. Right, I was always thinking about design, and he would, every house that was in the area that was under construction, we'd go over and walk through the building.
mhm,
Probably would have gotten into trouble if somebody found us, but we were walking through and you know doing the criticizing the floor plan and all that kind of thing. And so but when I got into high school, it was right in the middle of the space race, going to the moon.
mhm,
And I actually got more interested in aeronautical engineering, and that's what I thought I wanted to do.
mhm,
To the point where I took Russian in high
mhm,
school, because I thought, well, if I'm going to be an aeronautical engineer, I need to talk to the guys that we're trying to compete with, and so I need to learn Russian. Um, but in my junior year of high school, I took a mechanical drawing class, which started the first semester out with drawing, solid objects and kind of engineering type drawings.
mhm.
But the second semester in the spring was about architectural drawing. And as soon as I started doing that, I found that the engineering wasn't so interesting anymore. I really thought that architectural design and that kind of visioning of things was of more interest to me. It was more
Mhm.
creative. It was more, right-brained, which I think I was, even though I'm not left-handed. I'm right-handed. But anyway, it was just more interesting. And so I ended up applying to architecture school. And when I went to architecture school, I had no idea what I was in for. I was very naive, I think, in terms of what I was expecting architecture school to be.
Mm.
But I was very fortunate that a few of my professors kind of took me under their wing, and I found that I was, I was kind of competing with all these other students that I was in school with that were better artists than me, they could draw better than me, they could do a lot of things better than me from a technical perspective. And I was a little bit insecure,
Mhm.
but I had a few professors who encouraged me and said, "Don't worry about what your drawings look like. That's not the point. uh, the drawings are, and we're going to talk about, design process and design thinking. Drawings are a means to an end, not the end in themselves, and you shouldn't worry about what your drawings look like. There are ways of exploring, they're tools to explore ideas. And so I kind of loosened up and got less concerned about what they look like and more interested in kind of where they led me and the explorations that they led me in. So I survived architecture school, which in and of itself was a big thing. Went to graduate school as well, and then came out and started to work. And I started, having grown up in New Jersey, I started working for a firm in Princeton, New Jersey, and spent a number of years there with a few interruptions, because my wife went to graduate business school, so we moved away and then came back. And I continued to practice in New Jersey and did a range of educational projects and corporate projects, and then got into interior design with that firm. And ultimately, we decided to open an office in New York in the early 90s. And I led the office in New York until 2001, where I just decided it was time for a change. I'd been with that firm for most of my career at that point. And so I joined another firm in New York, but then very shortly after that, I ended up at what is now FXCollaborative. Yeah. It was Fox and Fowl, and Fox then and Fowl, FX yeah. Fowl, yeah. And now FXCollaborative. Right. And the best thing I ever did, first of all, was come to New York, because the kind of work that was the opportunities for projects in New York was so much better in terms of the quality of the clients, the quality of the projects, the kind of intellectual challenge of it, everything. Right. I don't want to put down New Jersey, but
no, I hear you.
I still live there. But but the challenges professionally were so much more significant in New York, and I really enjoyed being in New York. And it's been interesting, even over the last month or so, starting to come back into New York on a regular basis after having been away because of COVID. Even though we're not back to 100%. Pre-pandemic levels of people on the street and all that, it's just a rush to be back in New York, yes. And I was walking down Fifth Avenue yesterday, and there are people out and people going to stores, and the tourists are coming back, and it's just so invigorating to do that. And so there was a real reason that I enjoyed being in New York, and joining FXCollaborative when I did was also great, because the firm has been really a leader in the architectural community in New York and in other around the world, and so I was very fortunate to join the firm, and over 17 years now almost, we've done some amazing projects, and I've been involved with all sorts of incredible clients and opportunities in New York that I just would never have imagined I could be involved with prior to that. So that's kind of the journey, and in a nutshell, if that's a nutshell.
Well, thank you for sharing. And what I find, I completely agree with you on the New York story. Is that when I moved from Boston to New York in '99, it was the same thing. It was just the rush. And I mean, the reason I moved from Boston, where I was very happy personally, was that every time there was a big project, the client went with an architect in New York, not with the architect in Boston. And they were really good architects in Boston, but anytime there was a project that I wanted to work on, like an infrastructure project, it always came to New York. So the writing was on the wall. And once you come here, then you see those photographs of, April, May of last year when Times Square was empty. And you're like, well, people were saying, we're leaving New York, we're not going to be here. It's crazy, it's crowded. Yeah, it is. It's crazy,
well, we've been through, and New York has been through challenges before with, 9/11 and then Superstorm Sandy and all that. And everybody talked about nobody's going to come back to New York and all that.
Exactly.
And every one of these challenges is different, um, and they're all significant. But I think you know, New York is such a special and unique
Place.
place
Yeah.
that ultimately people do want to come back. And um, I think that it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of timing and how quickly it'll happen. And uh, you know,
I totally agree.
we're working with a number of developers on residential towers and other office buildings and other things that, you know, they all feel bullish about it too. They know that if they don't keep these
Mhm.
projects moving forward, that you know, as people feel more and more comfortable about being in the city, that they're going to need places to live. And
Mhm.
so we're doing a lot of you know, new uh, residential projects that incorporate affordable housing in them, and you know, will hopefully create an opportunity for more people to move into the city and create really 24/7 communities.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah. Well, there's so much to talk about, Guy, but I know you have some beautiful slides to share with our guests.
yeah,
So maybe we can switch gears.
is really our mission statement. This is sort of what we believe in at the firm at FX Collaborative. And we talk about intelligence as being our experience and our expertise, and intuition being our instincts and kind of gut feelings about what we do, and interconnection being our relationship to the rest of the world, not, you know, our clients, our consultants, everybody else we work with, and ourselves. So this is kind of the collaborative part of what we do. And we really believe that we need to build um, projects that have that endure and have a long life, that we do it with respect for our planet's resources. So we've been a leader in sustainable design for many, many years now, and are very committed to that and taking that to the next level. We also believe very strongly that all of our clients have a unique culture that we need to understand. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the design thinking process. And that also that social responsibility and diversity is something that we need to work hard at all the time, not just in our own firm, and we um, uh, give people opportunities, but also in how we do our projects, and what we think about when we design, and having you know, providing access to everybody for the projects that we do. So on the next slide, I put a diagram together that, you know, it's many years ago. The D School at Stanford really, I think, popularized the idea of design thinking, and it's now become a real discipline. But you know, when I was in architecture school, we didn't call it design thinking, but we talked about the process of design. Um, and this is really something I think we do all the time now in our projects, where when you empathize with our clients, we kind of, again, as I said earlier, we understand, we try to understand what makes our clients tick, what their culture is about, and that helps us define the problem. So, and that's really the next step, is to define the problem. And sometimes that's very quantitative, where you're taking requirements of a client and saying, we need so many offices, workstations, conference rooms, et cetera, of a certain size, and you add them all up, or maybe so many classrooms and faculty offices, et cetera, and you add all that stuff up, and you come up with a quantitative answer. But what's also important is that you define what their qualitative requirements are. What are their cultural drivers? Because that's just as important as the numbers. And you kind of define the problem in both of those ways. And then out of that comes a process of ideation, really initial designs, where you create alternatives, you look at different options of how you're going to solve a problem, then ultimately you try to prototype those projects, and sometimes through the prototyping, whether that's building models or looking at things like, in 3 dimensions, you start to think about, okay, what can be improved? What are the ideas from one concept to another that work and what doesn't work? And you kind of loop backward again and use that to rethink those ideas. And then ultimately you get through a point where you test those ideas in a more real world situation. And that leads to kind of the final design that everybody agrees to. But on the next slide, you'll see that it's never really a linear process. That previous diagram kind of showed it as a linear, but it's not. It's a really continuous feedback loop of dialogue, discussions, insights, ideas that then generate more dialogue and insight, and you keep spiraling in and tightening the circle, if you will, towards a singular idea that ultimately is the right solution. And so on the next slide, a lot of this then comes together by looking at what we see as kind of the 3 key components of a design. So our attitude towards urbanism, most if not all of our projects are urban projects. So what's the relationship to the city? Sustainability, and how are we designing the building to maximize performance and minimize energy usage, and technical innovation, which then is the key to kind of delivering the project, and how do we put the project together. So on the next slide, just some examples of urbanism. So we do large scale planning work in addition to architecture. So we're looking at urban planning and how buildings fit into an urban context. But even on the individual building level, how do buildings sit within their urban context? How do they meet the street? How do they serve the greater good? Because any building in a city, it's designed to serve the people that occupy it and use it, but it's also got to be designed to serve the community and the people that walk by it. So how does it fit within the city? On the next slide, we kind of look at sustainability and the relationship of the building to its site, but also the relationship of it to solar orientation and wind and all of those things that can allow us to take advantage of those natural situations, the natural context, if you will, so that we don't have to rely as heavily on mechanical systems. The 4 Times Square, which was really the first sustainable high-rise done in the United States, almost 25 years ago now, has integrated photovoltaic panels on the facade. We've done a lot of work with green roofs, and we've also looked at projects that have solar shading devices built into their facades. So all these are either helping produce energy, allowing the building to produce energy or lower its energy use, and also give it a more high performance envelope. On the next slide, we talk about technical innovation. And as I said earlier, when we were talking about the last year and a half or so, I think the technology strides that have occurred really are incredible, but we've also been able to lever, BIM technologies, building information modeling systems, to work with contractors and suppliers, to really speed up the design to construction process, even to the point where the building we did at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, was largely a pilot building or pilot labs to study new ways of manufacturing and construction to build things more sustainably. So finally, well, not finally, but I want to give a couple of examples. So if we go to the next slide of how we go through our design process. So this is a project called 35XV. It's on 15th Street in Manhattan, the West 15th. And this was a project that we were engaged in that used the air rights that Xavier High School had in their school buildings. There was excess air rights. And so they put out a request for developers to submit proposals to build a residential tower above additional classroom and educational space for the school. And so the diagram on the right is an interesting diagram because it shows the sky exposure plane from zoning. And rather than do a kind of typical step back building to meet the sky exposure plane, we came up with this idea of sloping the facades along the sky exposure plane, which resulted in adding additional square footage to the building. Sorry, my throat is getting a little tired. But anyway, if you go to the next slide, to get to that ultimate solution, we went through a process of studying a number of alternatives. These are very small study models that we did out of foam and out of cardboard and combination of foam and even rubber bands to hold the thing together to study what the best way of maximizing or utilizing this sky exposure plane would be. So we developed a series of these models, both for internal use, but also to show the client. And then we converted those on the next slide to a series of drawings that illustrated that in a little more real world terms to the client, and then started to look at the structural mass and how vertical elements could be inscribed onto the building or banding, and also how we could use some of the facade to screen and shield the sunlight. So as you can see, we went through a series of rounds of ideation on this until we kind of got to the final solution in the 6th round of studies. And on the next slide, you see the final result. So the bottom portion of this building from the setback down is additional classroom space for Xavier High School and is entered from 16th Street, separate from the condo tower. And then the condo tower sits above it and is entered from 15th Street. And so the realization that we could kind of build this building and meet the zoning skylight exposure planes, but also maximize the square footage, both won us and the developer of the project because we got extra square footage out of it, and they were therefore able to offer Xavier a better deal. On the next slide, you can see, the building again serves kind of two worlds, right? So the bottom of the building where the school is more of a community scaled building and is relatable as you walk down the street. It's got a stone facade, it's got punched windows, it's much, the scale of it is much more in keeping with the scale of the street. And then the top of the building where the condos are, the materials and the kind of overall design is much more of at a city scale. So you see this building from afar, and you can appreciate it as a tower in the city, while at the same time at the street, the building relates to the street. On the next slide, you can see some of the facade development. These are little eyebrows that we use to help shield the sun and create some visual interest. And on the next slide, you can see this is the Xavier High School portion of the project where they come in and connect to their school building. And then finally, on the next slide, you can just see it within, again, the tower within the context of the overall city roofscapes and kind of this topography of the city and the buildings in the city. The next project I wanted to show is a project that we did in Turkey, in Istanbul. And this it was a tower that ultimately became Allianz Insurance's headquarters in Turkey. But when we were thinking about this building in its situation, in its context, it was really an exploration of what an iconic tower could be in that part of Istanbul, which was on the east side of the Bosphorus, so it was on the Asian side of Istanbul, and there was not a lot of other high-rise buildings in the area. So we wanted to do something that was much more iconic. So you can see we just did a lot of different studies on this. In drawing form, on the next slide, we also did a number of different studies in solid modeling. These are all little styrofoam and cardboard modeling that we did, and ultimately kind of ended the exploration with the concept that's the second one from the right. You can kind of see it as it's a kind of needle-ish building. And on the next slide, we tested those ideas in many ways, but this illustrates a solar testing that we did. So looking at all of the different orientations of the building, where the solar gains were, and with the idea that we would add solar shading devices on the building where the biggest impact could be to shade the building and keep the heat gain down. So the furthest to the right diagram shows the beginnings of this study of where the panels could go on the facade that would offer the best shading for the overall facade. So then on the next slide, you can see the actual building, and you can see those kind of bronze panels that go up the building and are staggered in different ways on different facades. So the facade that's kind of facing you on the left side there doesn't have any panels because that's the north facade. But as you go around on the east, south, and west facades, the panels then increase in number. So on the next slide, you can see the south-facing facade, which has the maximum number of panels to shade the facade and reduce the solar heat gain on it. And these were all run through computer models and tested with algorithms to get this to generate what we ultimately did. And then you can see on the next slide another view of the building from the other side, where the panels are reduced even further. And then the final slide of this series is just the top of the building, which is in itself very iconic. You can see it's taller than anything in the area and really makes a statement against the skyline.
Hey, Guy, can I just jump in with a quick question?
Sure, yeah.
Right at the beginning, you mentioned about culture and empathy and how the process kind of all connects. And I was very curious that, I mean, your projects show the inquiry that goes into analyzing the problem, spending the time to kind of really first empathize. I love that word, that you're empathizing with them so that you can really understand what the problem is and then figure out solutions. But I do want to ask, connected to that, and especially after seeing this project in Istanbul, the materiality, the choices that you make, right? Or the context that you are operating in,
right?
And its connection with the material available. How does that kind of come together for you? Is that an important player in your process, in your thinking, in your problem solving?
Well, materiality is very important to us, and the craft of the building. How you actually put it together, how you detail it. What are the connections from one material to the other? Those are things that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and but it does start with materiality, which most of the time starts with the scale of a project and the context that it's in. I don't think about context the same as maybe other people do, where if you're building on a street or you're building in a context where there's a lot of other brick buildings, for instance, does the building you do have to be brick? I sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Yeah, right.
Um, but but it really has to do with the scale and the kind of uh, consideration of the neighborhood and how people are going to engage with the building. So I could see, we did an all glass building for the Columbia University School of Nursing,
Hmm.
which sits in a context with many other buildings that have limestone facades and cast stone facades and punched windows. But it looks totally appropriate for where it is because the materiality grew out of their idea of their building being open and transparent and kind of a lantern in the
Right,
neighborhood, right? So that became totally appropriate.
right,
And as we explained that idea to them and we explained it to the community up in upper Manhattan, we didn't get any resistance to it because it was a kind of natural outgrowth of the program for the building.
right. Hmm.
Um, at the same time, we did a complete block project where the old St. Vincent's Hospital site was down in Greenwich Village,
Sure.
where we used some of the existing St. Vincent's buildings again and redid them for residential use. And we built new buildings and we designed a series of townhouses. But these buildings were all within the Greenwich Village Historic District. So
Sure.
in that case, we did them all in brick and we,
Yeah.
worked with the context.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're modern buildings and they don't look like they were
Yeah.
built, 150 years ago. They're new buildings. So every one is different.
I
You
remember
draw
that.
out the materiality from the program, from the location, from its orientation to the sun and how you want to think about the environment. And then, more recently, we've been doing more work with passive house design, which is a kind of net zero high performance building. And there are requirements for reduced amounts of glass and things. So now, as we go on and get further and further into our research on sustainability, that leads to new thoughts about materiality and how what
Yes.
materials we use on a building.
Well, thanks for sharing. So back to your slides.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, the last project I want to show is the Statue of Liberty Museum, which we finished a few years ago. And this was interesting because we worked with a number of different client groups. So there was a lot of consensus building that we needed to do. But one of the ways we did that was, again, through the design thinking process of looking at options. So this was kind of our initial options. I can't really point on this, but you can see the statue and its base kind of in the lower right, and then there's a plaza that goes up to the upper left, and then there's a circular plaza, and then another right hand or left hand 90-degree turn to where the ferries drop people off. And so that was how people came into the statue. And the driver for the project was that the original, well, they wanted to build a museum to tell the story of the statue. But the original torch, which was removed in the restoration of the statue, had been stored in an exhibit in the base of the statue, but it was badly lit, as you would appreciate. Terrible lighting, and very limited access to the space. And so they really wanted to give it its own space to exist in and also tell the story. So that's what drove the program. We looked at a number of different solutions of where the building could go, and looking even at some different pavilions that would house different exhibits, and even looking at the base of the statue and whether we could redo the base in a way that made sense. So these were the sketches that we developed. On the next slide, we also did kind of three-dimensional versions of those and hand drawing sketch form. that kind of explained to the clients the ideas behind the alternatives and how that would um, create new space. In the end, none of these became the solution because it was again a process of exploration with the client. And I guess if you wanted to say that the Stola idea was the most closely related to the actual building we did, um, because of its general location and its entity as a separate building. That's what we did. But on the next slide, you'll see that we ended up actually coming up with the idea of the building as part of the landscape. And so you can see at the left side of this drawing, the angular building, which is really largely a green roof and a viewing terrace that you go up a set of steps from the circular plaza and have a view of the harbor and a view at the statue. And under the green roof then is all the exhibit space. And so on the next slide, you can see the view that we created, looking, from the statue back to the new building, which is in the background of the island. And you can see the steps going up to the green roof and the viewing platform. And then the next view shows it from the statue itself. So if you are fortunate enough to go up into the statue and look back, you can see the museum from there. And on the next slide, you can see at the plaza level, the way that the building integrates into the landscape. Actually, the landscape has all grown significantly since this picture was taken. And then the final slide shows the museum in the context of the city, but also shows, you can see through the glass wall there, the new room that was created to display the original torch, which is stunning and amazing. And, to be able to walk up to it, not allowed to touch it, but you feel like you can reach out and touch it and understand it better. And then understand the story of the statue itself, but the reasons behind the statue coming here and France's gift to the United States. So, all of those different explorations kind of led to this solution.
The scale and the way you've done the steps and how Manhattan then, and even for that matter, Brooklyn, because you can see Brooklyn from.
Oh yeah, you can definitely see Brooklyn. Yeah. We can see the Statue of Liberty from our well, not from our space, but the higher floors in our building, you can see the harbor and the statue. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, is making Manhattan and Brooklyn the stage, and then the audience is sitting in on Ellis Island looking back. It's quite, in the direction of Ellis Island looking back, is quite a remarkable analysis of solving a design problem in terms of design thinking, the topic for this talk. And kudos for that, because it's quite a stroke of genius that you've turned the whole thing around to kind of face back to the Big Apple, and of course the torch is and the glass structure is compelling.
Yeah, it's really a remarkable experience to go out there. I'd encourage everybody to do it. But I think the turning point was when we really understood the possibility of making the building part of the landscape as opposed to a kind of standalone building sitting there on the island.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of what I've understood from having worked with FX on some of your projects many moons ago and just following your work, is that it's all really beautifully positioned after a thorough analysis of how the site works and how the viewing angles work, how the context works, how the the materials work, how the climate works. And I remember that. When we used to do work with your firm, that you would spend a lot of time, your team would spend a lot of time figuring out the solar patterns, the ecotext models, and there were certain meetings where your big conference room at the space on 18th Street,
right,
full of these. At that time, we used to print things, right? So printed ecotech models. It was fantastic, yeah. And we have time for two questions. One of them is from the audience. She is asking about It's in the chat, but I can read it for everyone. Is there any consideration for future projects in New York City to address climate change and Zone 1 flood zone? Concern Lower Manhattan will be underground in 20 years. Love the 15th Street project and the magnificent St. Vincent Hospital development extraordinary. So the question is in the first part of the
Yeah.
chat.
Well, thanks for the compliment. But yes, all of our projects now are taking resiliency into account. Um, uh, Certainly in terms of mechanical systems and getting them above um, flood stages and making sure that they're not impacted the way they were at in Superstorm Sandy. But beyond that, just in terms of how they're built to be more resilient, what the floor levels are relative to projected flood lines, and so every project we do takes that into serious consideration. And then, of course, every project we're being very serious about how much energy the building itself uses, because this is, we all play maybe a small part in this, but collectively we play a large part. Buildings consume more energy than anything else other than transportation. And so we can make a difference. And how we design new buildings, how we retrofit old buildings is critical to reduce carbon consumption and the future, for climate change. We don't have much time left if we don't do something.
Well said. Well said. Well said. So to the last question for the day, what is this one project or project type that you would love to work on in the next 5-10 years, which you haven't had an opportunity to do so far?
um, I have always wanted to do an important academic science building, laboratory building on a campus. And if I could have one project that I'd like to do before I finish my career, that would probably be it. But there's so many others that I also, just city building in general is fun. And so anything that contributes to the life and the vitality of a city is something that I'd like to do.
Well, we wish you all the best. With the way you and your firm are going, I'm sure that's going to be a real possibility in the near future. And that is it for our show. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to the community and our subscribers. And a special thanks to our guest today, Guy Geier, managing partner at FXCollaborative here in Brooklyn, New York.
And thank you, Abhay. I really enjoyed being with you today.
Likewise. I mean, I wish we had more time when we could go on for, I have so many questions and so many
we could talk for a long time.
Yeah, but I mean, I know you're really busy, guys, so I really appreciate you taking the time to.
It's been my pleasure. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe at our YouTube channel. And thank you again to the community and to our subscribers. Thank you to our guest, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Ciao for now. Bye.